February 2nd, 1978, Rancho Cordova, California. Two gunshots shatter the quiet of a suburban evening, and Brian and Katie Maggiore, 21 and 20 years old, married less than a year, collapse on the sidewalk during what should have been an ordinary walk with their dog. Their killer, masked and methodical, disappears into the darkness, leaving behind two young lives ended and a community that will never feel safe again. This double homicide is part of a reign of terror that will span a decade, claim at least 12 lives, and traumatize hundreds of victims across California. The man responsible will evade capture for more than 40 years, his identity unknown, his crimes unsolved, until a revolutionary forensic breakthrough finally gives his evil a name. Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer. This is the story of how DNA technology, genealogical research, and the relentless determination of investigators who refused to give up would finally bring one of America's most prolific serial predators to justice. It is a story of victims who deserved better, survivors who carried unbearable burdens, and the painstaking work that transformed cold cases into courtroom convictions. But most importantly, it is a story about remembering, ensuring that the names of those who were lost are spoken with dignity, and that their lives are honored not by the violence that ended them, but by the love that defined them. Brian Keith Maggiore grew up in the kind of American family where tradition mattered. Sunday dinners gathered everyone around the table. Holidays meant cousins piling into the living room, and the expectation that you'd serve your country was never questioned. It was simply what honorable men did. When Brian enlisted in the Air Force, his parents were proud but not surprised. He was responsible, steady, the kind of young man who kept his word and looked out for others. At 21, he had already developed the bearing of someone older, calm under pressure, protective of those he loved, quick to offer help to neighbors or strangers who needed it. Katie Maggiore, born Katie Harrington, possessed the kind of warmth that made people feel immediately comfortable in her presence. Her nursing colleagues at the local hospital remembered her gentle touch with patients, the way she'd stay late to comfort someone who was frightened, how she always volunteered for the difficult shifts during holidays so that others could be with their families. She had soft brown hair that she wore long, a quick smile, and an infectious laugh that could lighten even the most stressful moments. At 20, she was still discovering who she wanted to become, but her compassion was already fully formed. They met through mutual friends, their connection immediate and easy. Brian was drawn to Katie's kindness. Katie loved Brian's quiet strength. Their courtship was brief but certain. Both recognized in the other a partner for life. Their wedding, held just months before their deaths, was a modest affair filled with joy. Their vows spoken with the earnest conviction of people who believed they had decades ahead to fulfill them. Their apartment in Rancho Cordova reflected their newlywed status. Furniture that was more functional than fashionable. Wedding gifts still in boxes waiting to be unpacked. A refrigerator covered in photographs and notes they'd written to each other. Katie kept a scrapbook where she documented their life together. Ticket stubs from the movie theater, pressed flowers from a walk they'd taken in the foothills. Brian's handwritten recipes for the dinners he was learning to cook. Brian maintained a small spiral notebook where he tracked their finances, always planning, always thinking about the future they were building together. They talked about children, how many they wanted, what they'd name them, whether they'd be strict parents or lenient ones. They dreamed about buying a house someday, about taking road trips to national parks, about growing old together. These dreams were not remarkable. They were the beautiful, ordinary aspirations of young people in love. But their ordinariness is precisely what makes their loss so devastating. Brian and Katie Maggiore were not destined for tragedy. They were destined for a life, a full, rich, meaningful life that was stolen before it truly began. But the Maggiores were not the Golden State Killer's only victims. The list of lives destroyed stretches across California, each name representing not just a death, but an entire universe of potential extinguished. Charlene Smith, a brilliant young attorney with a passion for civil rights, was bludgeoned to death in her own home alongside her husband, Lyman. Dr. Robert Offerman and Dr. Deborah Manning, both medical professionals devoted to helping others, were murdered in Goleta. Patrice and Keith Harrington, also newlyweds like the Majors, were killed in Dana Point. Manuela Withoon, a warm and generous woman who made everyone around her feel valued, was attacked while home alone recovering from an illness. Janelle Cruz, only 18 years old, was murdered in Irvine. She would be the killer's last known victim, her death in 1986 marking the apparent end of his decade-long spree. And beyond the murdered were the survivors, women who lived with the trauma of sexual assault, who spent decades unable to feel safe in their own homes, who flinched at unexpected sounds, who struggled to trust, to love, to simply exist without the weight of violation pressing down on them. Their suffering, though different from death, was no less real, no less deserving of acknowledgement and justice. The morning of February 1978 offers no hints of the tragedy that will unfold by evening. Brian wakes early, as military life has trained him to do, kissing Katie's forehead before heading to McClellan Air Force Base. Katie sleeps a bit longer, then rises to the familiar routine of a workday, showering, dressing in her nursing scrubs, eating a quick breakfast while their dog, a playful mixed breed, circles hopefully for dropped food. She leaves for her shift at the hospital, her mind already running through the tasks ahead. Medications to administer, charts to update, patients who would need her gentle care and reassuring presence. The winter day unfolds gray and cool, typical for Sacramento in February. The sky is overcast, threatening rain that will hold off until evening. At the hospital, Katie moves through her rounds, checking vitals, adjusting IVs, offering comfort to those in pain. Her colleagues remember her being in good spirits that day, talking about plans for the upcoming weekend, mentioning that she and Brian were thinking about adopting another dog to keep their current one company. Brian's day on base is routine. Drills, maintenance work, the structured rhythm of military service that he finds both demanding and satisfying. He leaves in the late afternoon, stopping at a grocery store on his way home to pick up ingredients for dinner. The mundane details of this errand, the items he selected, the checkout line he stood in, the cashier who rang up his purchases, will later be reconstructed by investigators trying to piece together the final hours of his life. By 6 o'clock, both Brian and Katie are home. They prepare dinner together in their small kitchen, sharing stories from their respective days, the dog positioned strategically between them, hoping for scraps. The television plays in the background, the evening news recounting local stories and weather forecasts. After eating, they wash dishes side by side, Katie washing while Brian dries, a domestic choreography they've developed over months of marriage. Around 7:30, Brian suggests they take the dog for a walk before the predicted rain arrives. Katie agrees, and they bundle into light jackets, not heavy coats, because the temperature isn't that cold, just cool enough to warrant an extra layer. The dog is excited, tail wagging frantically as Brian attaches the leash. They step outside into the dusk, the streetlights just beginning to flicker on, casting pools of amber light along the sidewalk. Their route is familiar, a path they've walked dozens of times through their neighborhood. Houses line both sides of the street, most with curtains already drawn, lights glowing from within. Other neighbors are out as well. A man washing his car despite the cooling temperature, a woman calling her children inside for bedtime, an elderly couple checking their mailbox. Everything is ordinary, safe, unremarkable. But somewhere in the shadows, someone is watching. The Golden State Killer has been active in the Sacramento area for more than 2 years. His pattern of home invasions and sexual assaults creating a climate of fear that has the entire region on edge. Tonight, for reasons that will never be fully understood, he is not prowling for a house to invade. Tonight, he encounters Brian and Katie Maggiore on a darkened street, and what happens next will mark an escalation in his violence, the first time he will kill in connection with his crimes. The confrontation happens quickly. As Brian and Katie round a corner onto La Alegria Drive, the masked figure emerges from between two houses. He is armed, his intentions immediately clear. Brian, operating on instinct and training, positions himself between the threat and his wife. Words are exchanged. "Run!" Brian shouts to Katie, but there is no time for escape. The first gunshot rings out, sharp and devastating in the quiet evening air. Brian falls. The second shot follows almost immediately, striking Katie as she tries to flee. Both collapse to the pavement, their dog's leash falling from Brian's hand as the animal runs in terrified circles, barking frantically. The killer stands over them for a moment, then turns and runs, disappearing into the maze of backyards and side streets that he clearly knows well. Neighbors, drawn by the gunshots, begin emerging from their homes. Someone screams. Someone else runs to call 911. The dog continues barking, refusing to leave Brian's side, nudging him with his nose as if trying to wake him. By the time the first patrol car arrives, Brian and Katie Maggiore are both dead, their bodies cooling on the suburban sidewalk where just minutes before they had been walking, talking, living. The ordinariness of the scene, a residential street, a young couple, an evening walk, makes the violence all the more incomprehensible. Detective Richard Shelby arrives at the scene within an hour of the shooting, his experienced eyes immediately taking in the grim details. The victims are young, too young, and there's something about the staged quality of the scene, the precision of the violence, that triggers recognition. Shelby has been tracking the East Area rapist for months, a serial predator who has been terrorizing Sacramento County with a series of brutal home invasions and sexual assaults. But until tonight, there have been no murders directly attributed to this offender. The methodology here, the stalking, the surprise attack, the cold efficiency, bears his signature. The investigation that follows is massive, involving multiple agencies and consuming thousands of man-hours. Forensic teams process the scene meticulously, photographing the bodies from every angle, collecting shell casings, measuring distances, searching for footprints, fingerprints, any physical evidence that might identify the killer. Witnesses are interviewed extensively. The neighbors who heard the shots, the man who was washing his car, anyone who might have seen a suspicious person in the area. Composite sketches are created from descriptions provided by survivors of previous attacks. A stocky white male, between 5'9" and 6 feet tall, between 25 and 35 years old. But the sketch is frustratingly generic, matching thousands of men in the Sacramento area. The investigation generates leads, hundreds of them, but each one dead ends. A suspicious vehicle seen in the neighborhood belongs to a resident. A man matching the description has an alibi that checks out. A potential suspect is cleared by fingerprint analysis. The emotional toll on the investigative team is profound. These are not abstract cases to the detectives working them. They are deeply personal. Many have met with survivors, have sat in living rooms with traumatized women who can barely speak about what happened to them. They've talked to families of victims, seen photographs of people who were alive and vibrant before they encountered evil. The frustration of being unable to solve these cases, unable to protect the community, unable to provide answers, weighs on them constantly. As months turn into years, the case expands in horrifying ways. The East Area rapist continues his attacks through 1979, then seemingly vanishes from Northern California. But in Southern California, a new series of crimes begins, home invasions resulting in brutal murders. Investigators eventually realize they're dealing with the same offender, now operating under a new name, the original Night Stalker. The pattern continues. Dr. Robert Offerman and Dr. Deborah Manning murdered in Goleta in 1979. Lyman and Charlene Smith killed in Ventura County in 1918. Patrici and Keith Harrington murdered in Orange County in 1980. Manuela Withoon killed in Irvine in 1981. Janelle Cruz murdered in Irvine in 1986. DNA evidence is collected from crime scenes, but the technology to analyze it effectively doesn't exist yet. The samples are carefully preserved, filed away with the desperate hope that someday science will advance enough to make them useful. Detectives retire, their careers defined by the case they couldn't solve. New investigators take over, reading through thousands of pages of reports, looking for the detail that was missed, the connection that wasn't made. By the early 2000s, DNA technology has advanced significantly, and investigators are able to definitively link the East Area rapist crimes to the original Night Stalker murders. They are hunting one man responsible for at least 12 murders, more than 50 rapes, and over 100 burglaries. But they still don't know who he is. The DNA profile sits in databases, waiting for a match that never comes. Paul Holes, a criminologist with the Contra Costa County District Attorney's Office, becomes obsessed with the case. He spends years organizing evidence, coordinating between jurisdictions, advocating for new approaches. In 2017, Holes learns about forensic genetic genealogy, a technique that uses DNA to identify relatives through public genealogy databases. It's a long shot, unprecedented in law enforcement, but it represents the first new avenue in decades. Working with genealogist Barbara Ray Venter and FBI forensic genetic genealogist Steve Kramer, investigators upload the killer's DNA profile to GEDmatch, a public database where people voluntarily submit their genetic information to explore family history. The results are not immediate matches. No parent or sibling appears, but distant relatives do. Third cousins, fourth cousins, people who share portions of DNA with the killer but might not even know he exists. What follows is painstaking genealogical research. Ray Venter constructs family trees, working backward through generations, identifying common ancestors, then working forward through their descendants. It takes months of meticulous work, building trees with thousands of individuals, narrowing possibilities, following lines of descent. Gradually, the pool of potential suspects shrinks. Names are eliminated because they're the wrong gender, the wrong age, deceased before the crimes occurred, or living out of state during the relevant time periods. Finally, a name emerges that fits all the criteria. Joseph James DeAngelo, born in 1945, a former police officer who lived in the relevant areas during the times the crimes occurred. Surveillance begins immediately. DeAngelo, now 72 years old, lives in Citrus Heights, a suburb of Sacramento, not far from where the Majores were killed 40 years earlier. He is retired, living quietly, showing no obvious signs that would draw suspicion. Investigators need confirmation, something that will hold up in court. They conduct physical surveillance, waiting for an opportunity to collect a discarded DNA sample. In April 2018, that opportunity comes. DeAngelo is seen depositing trash in a public bin. Once he leaves, investigators retrieve the items and extract DNA samples. The forensic comparison is conducted with painstaking care, multiple analysts verifying the results independently. The match is absolute, incontrovertible. The DNA from Joseph James DeAngelo's discarded trash matches the DNA collected from crime scenes spanning a decade and hundreds of miles. After 40 years, the Golden State Killer has a name. April 24, 2018. The sun has barely risen when the tactical team positions itself around DeAngelo's house in Citrus Heights. The arrest warrant has been signed, the plan rehearsed, every contingency accounted for. This is not a man to be underestimated. He is a former police officer, he knows investigative procedures, and he has successfully evaded capture for 4 decades. The knock on the door comes at 6:15 a.m. When D'Angelo opens it, he finds himself facing a line of armed officers, their weapons drawn, their expressions grim with the weight of history. Joseph James D'Angelo, you are under arrest for murder. The words delivered clearly. Officially, D'Angelo's face registers shock, then something that might be resignation. He does not resist. The handcuffs click closed around his wrists, and one of America's most prolific serial predators is finally in custody. The news breaks within hours, spreading across California and then nationally, internationally. Survivors of the East Area rapist attacks, now in their 60s and 70s, receive phone calls from victim advocates. Some weep with relief. Others feel anger resurge. 40 years they've waited. 40 years of checking locks and sleeping with lights on and never quite feeling safe. The families of murder victims gather, holding each other, trying to process the impossibility that after so long, there are finally answers. The legal proceedings are complex. D'Angelo is charged with 13 counts of murder, including murder with special circumstances that could warrant the death penalty, and 13 kidnapping-related charges. But as prosecutors prepare for trial, a decision is made to pursue a plea agreement. The reasoning is multifaceted. D'Angelo is elderly and in poor health. A trial could take years and would be emotionally devastating for survivors who would have to testify, and a plea deal ensures conviction without the risk of legal challenges. In June 2020, Joseph James D'Angelo enters a guilty plea in Sacramento County Superior Court. The plea hearing is unlike anything most courtrooms have ever witnessed. Over multiple days, survivors and family members are given the opportunity to deliver victim impact statements, to finally confront the man who destroyed their lives. The statements are devastating in their raw honesty. A woman in her 70s, attacked in her home in 1977, stands and addresses D'Angelo directly. "You came into my house. You tied me up. You violated me in ways I still cannot speak about. You stole my sense of safety, my ability to trust. I have spent 43 years in therapy, 43 years unable to sleep without medication, 43 years carrying shame that belongs only to you. You are a coward and a monster, and I want you to know that I survived you. I built a life despite you. You do not get to define me." Chris Pedretti, whose mother, Manuela Vithoun, was murdered in 1981, speaks through tears. "I was 15 when you killed my mother. 15. She was home alone, recovering from an illness, completely vulnerable. You broke into our house and you murdered her. Do you understand what that did to our family? My father never recovered. My siblings and I had to grow up without her guidance, without her love. Every milestone, graduations, weddings, the births of grandchildren she will never meet, is marked by her absence. You took everything from us, and for what? What satisfaction did you get from destroying innocent lives?" Gay and Bob Hardwick, survivors of a 1978 attack in Stockton, deliver a joint statement. "We were newlyweds, like so many of your victims. We had been married less than a year when you broke into our home in the middle of the night. You held us at gunpoint. You threatened to kill us. You put dishes on my back and told me that if I moved and they fell, you'd kill my wife. For 42 years we have lived with that terror. We've moved multiple times, installed security systems, slept with weapons nearby. You taught us that the world is not safe, that evil can invade your home at any moment. But you also taught us something else, that love is stronger than fear. We survived you. Our marriage survived you. And now, finally, we get to watch you spend the rest of your miserable life in prison." D'Angelo, seated in a wheelchair, shows no visible emotion throughout the statements. He does not look at the people speaking. He offers no apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the suffering he caused. His silence is its own kind of cruelty. Judge Michael Bowman delivers the sentence on August 24th. 2020. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Consecutive life sentences for each murder. Mr. D'Angelo, there are no words to adequately describe your depravity, the judge states, his voice echoing through the courtroom. You preyed on innocent people in their homes, the places where they should have been safest. You destroyed lives, shattered families, and traumatized an entire state. You deserve no mercy, and this court gives you none. You will die in prison, and the world will be better for it. When the final gavel falls, signaling the end of proceedings, the courtroom erupts in a mixture of applause, tears, and embraces. Victims' family members hold each other, their grief validated, their long wait for justice finally concluded. Survivors gather outside the courthouse, surrounded by media but focused on each other, sharing a moment that only they can fully understand. The closure that comes not from healing, which remains ongoing, but from knowing that the man who terrorized them has been held accountable. Detective Richard Shelby, who responded to the Maggiore murders in 1978, is present for the sentencing. Now in his 70s and long retired, he watches the proceedings with a complex mixture of emotions. I spent 40 years thinking about this case, he tells reporters afterward. There were times I didn't think we'd ever solve it. Times I thought he might be dead, or that we'd just never have the break we needed. To see him sitting there in handcuffs, finally facing consequences, it's profound. It doesn't bring anyone back. It doesn't undo the harm, but it matters. Justice delayed is still justice. Paul Holes, whose work on forensic genetic genealogy was instrumental in identifying D'Angelo, retires shortly after the arrest. He becomes an advocate for the technique, helping other jurisdictions solve cold cases using similar methods. The Golden State Killer case proved that no case is too old to solve, he says in interviews. As long as we have DNA evidence and the determination to pursue it, there's hope. In the 2 years since D'Angelo's arrest, we've seen dozens of cold cases solved using genetic genealogy. That's his real legacy, not the terror he caused, but the innovation his capture inspired. The victims' families find different paths to peace. Some establish scholarships in their loved ones' names, ensuring that good emerges from tragedy. The Manuela Withoon Memorial Fund provides support for domestic violence victims. The Brian and Katie Maggiore Memorial Scholarship helps young couples pursuing careers in nursing and military service. These gestures don't erase the loss, but they ensure that the victims are remembered for who they were, not just how they died. Survivors, many of whom spent decades in silence, begin sharing their stories more publicly. They write books, give interviews, speak at victim advocacy events. Their willingness to be vulnerable, to describe their trauma and their healing, helps others who have experienced violence. The shame that the Golden State Killer tried to impose on them is rejected, transformed into strength and solidarity. California itself changes in subtle but meaningful ways. The case prompts discussions about statute of limitations for sexual assault, about resources for trauma survivors, about the importance of preserving evidence in cold cases. Law enforcement agencies nationwide adopt protocols inspired by the investigation, ensuring that DNA evidence is properly stored and that old cases are periodically reviewed for new investigative opportunities. And in neighborhoods across Sacramento, Orange County, and the other communities where the Golden State Killer operated, life continues. Families lock their doors at night, not out of paralyzing fear, but out of reasonable caution. Children play in yards where decades ago terror reigned. The streets are no longer haunted by the specter of an unknown predator. They are simply streets again, places where life unfolds in all its ordinary complexity. Joseph James D'Angelo will spend his remaining days in a maximum security prison, isolated from society, his infamy ensuring he is recognized but not celebrated. He will grow old in a cell, deprived of freedom, of dignity, of the ordinary pleasures he denied so many others. And when he dies, which given his age will likely be soon, he will be mourned by no one, remembered only as a cautionary tale about how evil can hide in plain sight, and how justice, though sometimes slow, can still arrive. The real legacy belongs to the victims and survivors, to Brian and Katie Maggiore, who were building a life together when violence intervened, to Charlene Smith, Deborah Manning, Manuela Withoon, Janelle Cruz, and all the others whose names deserve to be spoken with respect and sorrow, to the survivors who carried unbearable burdens with remarkable courage, and to the investigators who never stopped seeking answers, who believed that every victim deserved justice, no matter how long it took. In the end, the Golden State Killer case is not a story about evil, though evil was certainly present. It is a story about resilience, about the refusal to accept that some crimes are unsolvable, about the power of science and determination to illuminate even the darkest corners. It is a reminder that justice is not always swift, but that doesn't make it any less necessary or meaningful. And it is a testament to the enduring truth that what we remember, how we honor those who were lost, and how we support those who survived. These are the things that define us, not the cruelty we endured, but how we responded to it. The California night is quiet now. The streets are safe again, and somewhere, in the silence that follows a long journey toward justice, there is finally peace.